Hi, my name is Gareth Kelly. I'm an Associate Director and Financial Controller in O'Dwyer's. I'm delighted you could join us here today for our monthly client information talk entitled Roof Repairs and Replacement. Very interesting area, and I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing more about it. Just to introduce our speaker today, Paul Keenan, who's the founding director of Keenan Lynch Architects and has over 20 years experience in construction projects. So Paul's designed and overseen the construction of numerous apartment developments in Dublin. The main interests are in the field of sustainability and conservation, in which he has a Grade 3 architecture accreditation. Paul's a member of the RIAI task force for appointment of and collateral warranties and is technical advisor for the Architects Registration Board. So Paul's presentation will be approximately half an hour, and afterwards we'll have time for some questions. So I'd like to hand you over to Paul now.
Thank you. Thank you, Gareth. I suppose from the point of view of my presentation, that sort of covers, for a start, my qualifications. But before any kind of movie starts or anything else, you have to go through the ads, and I suppose this is the opportunity for me to just quickly give you some overview in relation to some of the projects that we've been involved in various aspects. So, as I say, this is really my profile, so I won't stay on that too long. But in relation to the projects we've completed, we've a large amount of retail, we've worked on hotels, worked on commercial projects. All these projects now seen on screen are projects that we have designed and built. Car showrooms, did a lot of work for Dunnes Stores, I say retail area. Moving into other areas then, apartments was mentioned that we've been involved in design, build, completion of several apartment complexes. And in relation to the sort of works that we've done more on the building pathology end, that would be surveying properties, seeing what problems they have, mainly to a large degree pre-purchase sort of reports, as well as schedules of dilapidations. They would be a report on the condition of a property that was the subject of a lease. In the case of that bottom picture, we have worked on several for the IDA, where the tenants are handing back the buildings and they're expected to be handed back in the state that they were originally leased, subject to normal wear and tear. You can take your own view as to whether that bottom picture, how much of that is wear and tear, but that was all subject to scrutiny. And then on apartments, we've had various consultancy roles in relation to apartments that we haven't designed, including insurance reinstatement valuations and fire safety upgrades, for example. Finally, I suppose in relation to topical issues, we do a lot of roof design, and that particular image is a project that we worked on and completed recently for Dunnes Stores. When I say recently, it was completed in, I think it was 2008. For Dunnes Stores in Rossgrey, it was a design that we inherited. Dunnes Stores bought a site with the benefit of planning permission, and you can see there's a series of roofs there. There's an old grain mill that has slated roofs, so there was a conservation element. There was zinc roofing, there was metal cladded roofing, there was flat roofing, and lots of valleys and flashing, all the sort of areas that can cause problems. So what are the main issues in relation to roofing? Well, I suppose at a basic level it starts with leaks, and in parallel with that there's maintenance, because sometimes lack of maintenance can cause leaks. And then at the more extreme end there's roof replacement, and I put them in two categories. One is a roof only has a certain length of time. You'll get a certain guarantee with a good product for a certain length of time, and a roof looked after will last. Generally, I suppose you'd throw out a figure of 40 years, but they can last a lot longer. On the other hand, what we've certainly seen in an aftermath of the Celtic Tiger is a lot of new roofs that have problems, and I particularly see some images related to that because they've been poorly constructed, poorly put together, poorly detailed. So, what sort of roof problems can you have? Well, sometimes it'll be very obvious what the problem is. Like that, storm damage and the sort of thing. You don't have to look very far to know what the problem is, even if you don't know what the best solutions might be or how about going about them. And then we have more obtuse ones. This is actually one that it's an apartment of a colleague of mine, and he'd lived in it, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 years and never had a problem. Then one morning he woke up, and I don't know if you can see the actual stains there, but there's a stain here and there's a stain here in the middle of the ceiling. Now, he was a semi-top level apartment, as you'll see from the next image, which this is the complex, and the yellow arrow there is pointing approximately to the apartment. And the question was, after so long, how come a leak suddenly appeared? And there can be several reasons, but the first thing that was apparent when it was in the room, that the water by its own nature will not necessarily appear directly below the source of it. It finds its way to track across, find the weakest link, and in some instances you can have a leak for a long time without it becoming apparent because there isn't enough water. The building fabric will absorb the moisture before it will show through. In this case, what happened was one of the walls at the upper level it came down to a flashing over their apartment, and it was basically that it wasn't exposed to extreme weather under normal circumstances. It was northeast facing, and therefore was not getting the prevailing wind with large volumes of rain. On this particular morning, a lot of rain, driven onto the wall, ran down the wall, found a great gap in the flashing, caused a leak to be seen inside. So it can be something simple. Even on a well-built building, sometimes these things can appear. Here's another instance of water penetration. In this case, you can see on the left-hand side the staining that's occurring. And that staining, again, this was actually an unexposed route. This was a north-facing elevation, so it was not exposed to the southwesterly winds and rain. Water wasn't coming in through the face, it was actually coming from the back, in fact from the top, from the parapet. A couple of little cracks in the parapet, that was the one area that needed to be investigated, but it wouldn't explain the amount of water. And you can also see in the other image at the bottom, this was where water was actually again coming out from the wall. And when the wall was opened up, it was found there was no DPC. There was no flashings down lower level. There were no flashings, no step flashings to divert water that got into that masonry and keep it from affecting everything below. So there were stains inside in the apartments. Fairly simple, but down to poorly detailed, poorly monitored construction. What do you do when somebody says, "I need a new roof"? And I think there is the tendency to maybe go out and talk directly to a roofing contractor. But if you went into a garage and said, "I need a new car," you would have an idea of what your expectation was. There's a big difference between one car and another car, and equally well there are differences between different types of roofs. Not all roofs are the same. So the roof specification is important, and the whole process of whether it's a new roof, a replacement or repairs, and going through a procedure to make sure that what is going to end up being the solution will last the time, that if you go to the end of that list, that you will get value for what is paid, and it isn't, of course, necessarily the cheapest. And down through that series of issues are choosing the material to use, the detailing, making sure it's installed properly, and indeed getting guarantees. Assessing it based on life expectancy, a series of issues that have to be taken into consideration. So just to touch on some of the types of roofs that there are, and we're dealing mainly here with flat roofs. We could spend hours talking about roofs and leaks and all the rest of it, but there are probably about 6 main types. I'm not going to deal with the last 2, synthetic rubber, EPDM, because to be honest I haven't actually installed one. And fiberglass, we've used fiberglass, but mainly on domestic extensions. It's fairly rigid and probably not as suitable to a lot of the instances that we're talking about. So the main ones are, starting with modified bitumen, Torch-On. Now, it's a good product. It's nice and thick, quite durable as a result, and relatively easily installed with a certain amount of equipment. I have down at the bottom of that list some words in red. DIY installers. This is the biggest bane here, is that unfortunately everybody with a small van thinks maybe they can lay this stuff, and it's not the case. You have to make sure that you're using the right product, because there are different Torch-On membranes, modified bitumen membranes available, and they do have different qualities. Some are well made, some are not, and we'll run through that slightly more when we come to issuing guarantees. There are then single ply membranes, or PVC basically. Again, can be very good for areas that are visible. Normally have a high technical backup, so you have approved installers. It's not as easy for somebody to just go and buy a roll and start laying a roof. So there is a certain amount of quality control normally involved. They are susceptible to damage, and when I say that, as you see, that's only 1 millimetre thick compared to the modified bitumen. So when something happens, if it's a nail on the surface, if it's somebody drags something, it's much more susceptible to actually causing a leak, whether obvious or inadvertent. Then have reinforced liquid waterproofing. This we have used in a lot of locations repairing roofs, particularly over a lot of Dunstore's older units where leaks appeared due to time. And again, there is an element of quality control involved here, because to lay this, it's fairly evident when it is actually applied properly. The best way to describe it is if you decided that your house externally needed to be repainted and you decided to put a coat of paint on it, you'd know if it was all blotchy and all the rest of it, that you need to put another coat on before it's finished. And the reinforced liquid waterproofing is rather similar. You have to apply a certain amount. It'll look visually right, and therefore, in principle, it is right. Again, approved installers, very useful for where there's difficulty to get access, difficulty getting heavy materials up, because it is quite portable. The only thing is that it is slow installation, so if time is an element, that might be a factor to consider. And then we have one of the old stalwarts, asphalt. Asphalt's a great product. Now we have 20 millimetres of material protecting the roof. So it's much less prone to mechanical damage. It is rigid though. It gets more and more rigid with time, and this is why they fail. You can see in the bottom slide there's a crack shown that if the substrate moves, then there may not be much forgiveness of the actual material, so that can cause problems. So again, there's a quality control issue. Selecting the right, not all asphalt is the same. There are different grades of asphalt. Again, we're not going to go into all that detail. I talked about certification and guarantees. And the first thing is that in any instance where we're using a product, we will seek, at the very least, an Agremont cert, whether an NSAI or British Board of Agremont. This is an independent assessment of the product and its suitability. It will have gone through certain test procedures, so it gives a certain independent overview on the use of the product and how good it is. If we find that one membrane has an Agremont cert and another hasn't got an Agremont cert, we're not going to use the one that doesn't have an Agremont cert anyway. That'll be part of a standard specification. And indeed, recently we were having trouble with a roof installation that was being done under the new government contract, where you cannot actually specify the product. You can give general specification to hint towards what you want to try and put it to a clear specification that there is certain projects, but it leaves it open at the end of the day to the contractor to pick the product. And we started to have a problem with this product. It had an Agremont cert, but during the course of the contract, actually, the Agremont cert was up for renewal when we were finding problems with the roof. And the Agremont cert wasn't renewed, which raised concerns. In the end, anyway, a different product was used in sorting out the problems. As I say, it won't guarantee, because problems do come up even with ones with Agremont cert, but at least there are procedures there to check it beyond our day-to-day own capability. And then you've guarantees. Now, there are guarantees available on various levels. Lots of people give you guarantees. Oh, that roof is guaranteed for 20 years, but you need some substance behind it. So the better products have manufacturer's guarantee. They will have approved installers. There will be an installer's guarantee. And a lot of the manufacturers now will provide it insurance backed, so that whenever the period is guaranteed for, and it might be anything from 10 to 20 years, there's an insurance backing to it. So there's something more substantial than just a piece of paper saying, I'll come back and fix your problems. And I think that's an important one to look out for, and what exactly it means rather than just words. In relation to the role of somebody like our firm, there's a series of things that are involved. Obviously, what we've just talked about gives a hint to the procedures that we go through in order to make sure that the job is going to be right. So you're assessing what the problems are. You're looking at the detailing and where, from experience, detailing might cause a problem. There's also competitive tender, so you're not just getting any one roofer in, but you are getting approved roofers maybe to cost works. There's contract insurance guarantees, all those matters, and also setting out at the end of the day a maintenance program, because a roof is like a car. It does have to be maintained. It does have to be made sure that something isn't happening out of sight, out of mind, that could shorten the length of life of the roof, or indeed just simply cause a leak. So here's a sample of some fairly clear water ingress. My colleague Bernard Lynch inspected this building recently, and while obviously the people living in these apartments were interested in the outcome, these leaks stopped the leaks. When he inspected the roof, they found that there had already been a clear sign that leaks had been suspected and works carried out. And he actually wanted me to point out that the sort of H's here, this was not a heliport. These are the patches, and there were a series of works carried out to this roof, just purely trying to stick the thumb in the dike and try and arrest the problems that had occurred because things weren't done properly in the first place. So what do you have? You have, like that previous one, patch repairs. We've come across instances where modified bitumen repairs have been put over joints in capping, and yet also led up the wall here, yet just basically not properly fixed the wall, not lapped with any DPC underneath the capping, so you don't have a continuous barrier to water penetration, and therefore there's the potential or the reality of leaks occurring. Other common problems come around where you have fixings through the roof, and even if they don't leak at first without proper detailing, they are prone to leaks occurring eventually. The fixings start to move as maybe that railing is subject to some lateral pressure and it opens up a hole. The fact that it's on the flat means that any water ponting in the area can seep in underneath the metal upstand. And then we have patch repairs to flashings, which have been carried out. The thing has leaked, and I think it's fairly clear that it has leaked. That's why that work has been done. But there are concerns about, even looking at that, there are concerns about the preliminary detail, because we take it that the grey just above the green is the original line of the flashing, but there's nothing going into the brickwork to stop the water hitting the brickwork and actually just saturating through the brickwork. It may not become apparent as an out-and-out leak internally, but it is affecting the building fabric, and it shouldn't be happening. Equally well around that vent pipe, it's very much a DIY patch-up. It will fail long before the roof membrane should ever fail, so it is the weak point. Here we have where a capping was removed and the original DPCs exposed, and again there's no continuity. Water hitting the brickwork on the right will saturate through the brickwork. There's nothing to stop it actually basically bypassing the DPC and getting into underneath the DPC, the masonry underneath that DPC, transferring across. Here's another roof, and again this is a building that's in receivership. And again, we have a series of patches. You can see, basically, it's been taken that the membrane that was down, which is rolled out, it's about 900 millimeters wide, the weak point in this was identified by somebody who went up to fix the roof, that the weak point was the joints in the membrane. But then, subsequently, somebody had to come along and start laying a patch over the entire, so they've a patch over the patch. And what we're looking at here is good money being thrown after bad. Because, sorry, before I go off that to the next one, you see this area here? This was an inaccessible roof. We had to use ladders to get up here, right? And yet, some of the final paving was in place, and 2 deck chairs. We reckon that actually one of the guys in the apartments below used this for doing some buff sunbathing or something. And the other thing that probably just on this is the insulation is totally inadequate. It doesn't meet the building regulation standard. But basically what we were looking at is an entire roof build-up that was a problem. And when we looked and we just saw where the roofing membrane, indeed the joints were poor. The joints were poor and could easily be pulled up. And on top of that, you can see that moisture was beneath the first level of repairs, and then opening up underneath The whole slab was saturated. Now, in terms of how this was manifesting, was in very heavy rain, it came down in one location, despite this roof was about 2,000 square feet. In one location only, water came through, but the entire slab was saturated. What we were looking at here is that the concrete would have a certain properties to resist water pouring through, but the concrete will have high moisture levels and would be affecting the battens in the timber ceiling below, which would be prone to rot attack and further problems with condensation, mould, etc. in the apartment. So this roof was a disaster, and say good money had been thrown after bad, and when really it should have been accepted at an early stage that the material that was used was let's say a non-standard one. Don't know where it came from, what country, what make, what controls were in it. And this was the core of the problem. Just touching briefly on pitched roofs, again some similar problems. You have things that you have valleys, upstand gutters, which have been patch repaired with all kinds of products, including proprietary DIY products that you can buy in your local hardware store. These are not suitable. This is not suitable detailing. It's not suitable material for stopping water getting into the building. You have maintenance issues such as vegetation growing in the gutters, which will cause backing up of the gutters and lipping over potentially into the building, and then overall slating problems. And talking about slating problems, as I say, all roofs have their life. So while on the right hand side I'm just identifying that, for example, when you get up and get good access to roofs, you can see that there are maybe cracks around chimneys that are allowing water in. On the left hand side, here's a roof that has been exposed, is aged. It was a particular job that we re-roofed. You can see the slates of about 3-4 different ages in them. They've re-clipped in with lead, so they're not properly held in any permanent way. The lead is a malleable material, so it'll rattle clear with wind again, so it's a short-term repair. That's, as I say, because a slated roof has its length of life before it has to be replaced. Main problem being the fixings, whether they are nails that have corroded and the slate starts to slip, or the holes through which the nails are fixed start to enlarge with movement and they pop out from it. One way or the other, at some stage the roof has to be replaced. So this is the same roof, slightly better condition slope because it's less exposed. Slates weren't in as bad condition, but in reality there were huge problems in the valley. There was dry rot beneath it. There were huge problems with this parapet wall, which again was fully exposed with a traditional cloak flashing, which is not a continuous barrier. So eventually, to just turn the level, when the roof was finished, this is what it looked like. So there was a full new copper valley, ventilation, new slating, ventilation to the sub voids to help prevent moisture buildup and problems with rot-attacked timbers, and encasement of the parapet wall, again with copper. What you're looking at here is, I think, you don't have to look far to see that this roof is likely to have less problems than the one that has inherent and very clear visual issues with it. And similarly, when you look at a roof like this, in terms of good practice, and we saw the other way that materials were just perforations through the membranes were dealt with. Here we have specific ways of dealing with plant on top of a roof to essentially eliminate risk to the roofing membrane. So what I would say is that if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't right. That's as good as anything. It doesn't mean that there's a leak underneath it, but eventually it can cause problems. When you've got something that looks well, there's a good chance that it's actually been done well, and that's a good starting point. So that's, I suppose, basically the presentation in relation to the roofing. As I say, can't cover everything, but if there are any questions.
One of the common roofs that we come across and with the problems is the one that the trope, we notice trope call. Is that the the liquid, reinforced liquid roof that you were discussing earlier on?
No, it was Trocol was the one with the coloured white and blue on Howth Yacht Club. And yes, it's very thin. So if somebody's even walking on it, they should be designated areas, and normally they're used with reinforced walkway areas, so that only really a roofer should go on the area that is not protected in that manner.
And in terms of repairs, that can be quite difficult. Is that just expert only, or is it something that like many contractors can do?
Well, again, as I said, these are normally Trocol. You should use an approved Trocol installer. So it's not anybody who can do it. There are others who were probably able to do it, but I would use an approved Trocol installer would be the way to carry out those. And obviously there are other, Trocol is one of the more common ones, names are known, but there are other products in that line. Again, use the approved. I think one of the best reference points you can have is actually the agent. His interest is in making sure that his roofs don't leak, that his reputation remains intact. So they're the first calling point in relation to problems with Trocol, not only to address the problem, but to avoid it the next time or avoid other problems. So it's worth having the agent, the manufacturer's distributor, out to review the roof. And often we would actually do that towards the end of a project, or even during a project if we were concerned about particular details, because these guys spend their full day working on that product, while roofers could be working on metal deck one day, could be working on lead another day. So, you know, they don't have the same hours build up in relation to expertise, never mind the training, that same level of training.
And on the mineralised felt roofs, I know the photographs there is probably just beforehand or whatever. The ballast is sometimes suggested to put on it to avoid the UV deterioration of pebble or whatever. Again,
that was traditional in the sense that most of them actually have now a surface protection on them. So it's back to everything. It's back to the Agrimont cert. It's back to the manufacturer's specification as to what they say should be done. And that's the key to it all. But no, they basically they don't have to be protected the way that we originally were carrying out work 25 years ago.
We have a question came in there from someone who's watching online. On a tiled roof, why do roofers only nail down 1 in 6 tiles?
Why do they only nail down 1 in 6? I don't know. It might be a particular tile that they're talking about. There are the small pan tiles. They're traditional clay tiles, which are quite small ones. They're nailed down every 3 rows. So it's not one. There's actually some that are unclipped. You've got normal concrete tiles. They're not clipped down at all. They're relying on their self-weight sitting on the timber battens. So I'm not too sure where the 1 in 6 comes from quite. But basically, again, it's back to the manufacturer's specification. The manufacturer will tell you the manner in which it has to be fixed.
There's another query coming through here as well. How often should roofs be checked for maintenance purposes?
Well, I would say twice a year anyway, because you're talking about the primary, I suppose the primary potential damage is going to be from flooding, depending on the type of roof. So you want to make sure that, particularly after autumn, that the rainwater pipes, the outlets, are not blocked. Want to clear off any debris. So once to twice a year, I would say. As I say, over the autumn period, you might be just at a risk that you might need more than once. Just one final thing, because this was termed at one stage, the actual seminar was advertised in relation to roof repairs and maintenance under the MUDS Act. I think I don't really have much to say about the MUDS Act other than, I suppose, this issue as to when you can spend money. You can spend the sinking fund on roofing issues. I would think that most of the issues that we've seen are related to non-repetitive expenditure. So it might only happen once in 10 years. If you had to fix a flashing and the rest of it, you know, it shouldn't need fixing again next year. The maintenance ones are going to be more the issues where you're going up and clearing out gutters, etc. So I think that most of these should fall within that the sinking fund and be covered by that. Is that everything? Okay. Thank you.
Very much.